I know that it looks the same. I'm inside my car, my 1984 Volkswagen Vanagon, but Constance has had me drive her to a Whole Foods uh, store here in Sacramento, but it's considerably far away for us. As big as a community that Sacramento is, it's pretty much a food desert. Okay, and I guess there is a Sprouts, and there is and of course a wonderful co-op. Uh, and Natural Foods Co-op, and there is a Whole Foods, but they're spread like 15 miles apart, and and it's a big thing for us to get out in our old Volkswagen buckboard here to shop. So uh, here we are at a new place on a Monday, because Tuesday we do other things. But anyway, I'm setting up here. I hope I've got a Wi-Fi signal, and the lighting is all different and everything else. But anyway, here we are. It's Monday, everyone. And yesterday, I talked about the Magick lamp. Okay, especially that if it was super important to Constance, because that's her pet magical weapon. And so last night, as just before we turned in, I was answering some emails with my little computer on my belly in bed, and she said, "Did very many people watch our lamp show?" And I said, "I don't know." So I checked. It appears both on YouTube, and it shows on Facebook how many watched it. On Facebook. So I added them together, and I said, "Well, I think close to 600 people watched it." And she said, "Well, is that a lot?" And I said, "Well, yeah, that's a lot. I've had other shows that I've had 1,200 and things like that." And she says, "Oh, I bet more people would have watched if we were talking about the sword or the cup or the wand or something." And I said, "Oh, I doubt it. It's I think who was going to watch was going to watch." But anyway, it got me thinking. I'll just see. I'm going to talk about the sword, the magic sword today, if I can, and we'll just see if people are sword people or lamp people. But anyway, so that's what I'm going to do today, and I'm going to read out of chapter 7 of a book that will be back in print, hopefully this year sometime. But first edition was with the good folks at Llewellyn, called Homemade Magic. And so here's the sword. And excuse the lighting here. Maybe I don't know if that helps. A little epigram from Crowley. The magic sword is the analytical faculty, attributed to air, all wandering, all penetrating, but unstable. The sword, necessary as it is to the beginner, is but a crude weapon. Its function is to keep off the enemy or to force a passage through them. And though it must be wielded to gain admission to the palace, it cannot be worn to the wedding feast. Okay, that was Crowley. The pentacle is engraved with a symbol that represents the magician's universe. The sword bears a word that represents the magician's universe. This can actually be a word, a noun, pronoun, verb, adverb, adjective, preposition, conjunction, or interjection of some language that is meaningful to you. Engraved upon the blade of an actual sword, you'd put this word. Or the word of the sword can be a more subtle vibratory expression of your universe than that which can be articulated by the sounds originating in your meat larynx and pushed over your flapping tongue and out of your mouth. I'd like to be able to tell you that I made my magic sword myself. That I, like the ancient magicians, dug the ore out of the ground with a shovel that I had fashioned myself, that I smelted the ore in the heat of charcoal I made from the wood of a tree that I planted myself as a young boy, and then chopped down myself, that I hammered the raw metal into a blade, etc., etc., etc. I'd like to be able to share with you the secret magic word I engraved upon its shining blade. Shazam! Abracadabra! Edikud! Edikud is the secret DuQuette family magic word to get out of trouble in nightmares and visions. Edikud. Figure it out yourself. But I didn't do any of those things. I bought my magic sword at an antique store near my home in Costa Mesa, California. But before you chastise me for being lazy and unmagical, I would like to share with you the circumstances surrounding its acquisition and what my magic sword means to me, how it qualifies to be my word. Hopefully the story will give you some idea of what these homemade magical weapons are truly about, and what you'll need to do to create or earn your own. My sword is a beautiful but modest Masonic Knights Templar ceremonial sword, made in the United States sometime between 1893 and 1923. There are thousands of them still cluttering the walls of antique stores and attics all over the world, and if you're lucky, you can probably still find one for yourself for less than $100. I'd been shopping for a good ceremonial sword ever since I was made master of Haru Raha Lodge OTO in January of 1978. Not only is a lightweight sword a necessary tool used in all OTO degree initiation ceremonies, but it's also the weapon of the priestess in the Gnostic Mass, the order's publicly celebrated ritual. In other words, both Constance and I need a good sword in the house. I located the sword of my dreams at a local antique store. It was a Masonic Knights Templar Commander's sword in good shape for something at least 80 years old, and adorned with esoteric symbols that are just as appropriate to ceremonial magic as they are to Freemasonry. It was a perfect length and weight, and came with its original scabbard, also beautifully and appropriately adorned. It was reasonably priced, but at the time I didn't have the money to buy it. In fact, I didn't have money to buy much of anything. Looking back, I'm happy I didn't have the funds to just purchase it when I first saw it in the shop. Because if I had just thrown it in my shopping cart, that particular sword might never have gotten itself infused with much magic. But I'll get to that part of the story in a moment. I need to tell you that my magic sword didn't start out as a sword. First, it was a guitar. A very special guitar. It was a handsome instrument, the finest I had ever owned. A 1968 C.F. Martin D28 with a butter-smooth setup and a rich response that was just perfect for my then primitive rhythm accompaniment style. I selected it from out of a dozen high-end guitars. I sampled it Johnny Thompson Music, the legendary store in El Monte, California, that serviced the artists and bands that populated the touring and recording culture of the golden age of popular music. Our producer at Epic Records drove my partner Charlie and me there one afternoon in early 1970 and told us, pick out whatever you want. I loved that guitar and broke it in, writing songs and recording 2 singles, an album, and playing more live performances than my hashish-addled years of sex, drugs, and rock and roll will permit me to remember. A friend and guitar student of mine, who happened to be a master woodworker, begged me to allow him, for an insanely reasonable price, to inlay the neck and headstock with mother of pearl and abalone shell. He adorned the fret markers with generous double triangles of mother of pearl. And at the 12th fret, he placed the Roman numeral 93 in iridescent green, blue, and pink abalone shell. On the headstock, he inlaid in abalone shell the name C.F. Martin, which plunged proudly between the rows of gold Schaller tuning posts. The crowning glory of my sweet Martin was the inlaid Egyptian solar disc, centered at the top of the headstock. Every feather was a separate iridescent piece of mother of pearl or abalone shell, cut and ground individually at a different angle and polished so it caught and reflected light from a different direction. As the guitar moved under the stage lights, the feathers appeared to flutter and dazzled the eye. Did I say it was a handsome guitar? It was breathtaking. My most precious possession. The apple of my eye and ear. It was coveted by every guitarist who laid eyed on it. In my mind, that guitar, more than anything else, more than my songs, more than my live performances, more than my own talent, real or imagined, even more than my recording career. That guitar defined who and what I was as an artist. It was my Excalibur. But in December of 1978, Magick had become my art. I no longer made my living on stage and in the studio. I had over-enjoyed the excesses of an aspiring rock star. I was a married man with a beautiful wife and a little son born in 1972. And in spite of the wild and wonderful adventures I experienced on the road, I really did want to be a good husband and stable father. The alcohol, the drugs, and the ladies ultimately couldn't compete with the love and warmth of my little family. For several years after I said goodbye to music, I worked a string of low-paying technical positions in the medical device manufacturing industry. These jobs barely paid the rent on our little apartment in Costa Mesa, and there was very little left over every month for food. I must confess the DuQuettes owed our existence to the almost supernatural thriftiness of my dear wife, Constance. Christmas fell on a Monday, Christmas that year. The company I was working for gave us only one day off for the holiday. Management waited until the end of the day on Friday, December 22nd, to announce that, regrettably, there would be no Christmas bonuses or even year-end gifts for the hourly employees. Now, even though the DuQuettes are not Christian, our family loves the Christmas season and makes the most of the cultural celebration. That year, Constance had brought home an inexpensive little tree strapped to her bicycle. It looked like she was riding her like a Christmas tree home. It was gaily decorated and had been emanating its Jovian perfume in our tiny living room for over a week. A handful of small homemade gifts were already wrapped and under the tree, but the real gift I was planning to get for Constance and little Jean-Paul had yet to be purchased, awaiting the Christmas bonus money that was not going to come. I felt pretty much like Bob Cratchit in Dickens' A Christmas Carol, faced with the grim prospect of delivering bad news to his family on Christmas Eve. I sat in my little cubicle at work and wallowed for a few minutes in self-pity. It was not a very dignified attitude for someone who was starting to identify himself as a serious magician. In fact, I didn't feel much like a magician at all. Poverty had dogged us from the moment I abandoned my recording career in 1972. My real-world jobs to this point had served to barely keep our heads above water. I was hoping that this Christmas would be different, a cheery and festive occasion for Constance and little Jean-Paul, like Christmases my hard-working parents had managed to throw for my brother and me in the 1950s. It then occurred to me that I had one asset, one golden treasure that I might sacrifice on the altar of Christmas to save the day. My Martin. Even without the custom inlay work, it was easily worth $1,000. I didn't, however, have time to find a buyer to give me close to what it was worth. It was too precious an item to pawn for just a few dollars, so I set the insanely low figure of $350, the amount I estimated my bonus would have been, and resolved that if I could immediately get that much money for the instrument, I would sell it and go Christmas shopping. I swung by our apartment after work and picked up my precious D28, then drove directly to Coast Music in Costa Mesa. They knew me there. During our recording years, Charlie and I were local Hollywood recording celebrities. The owner knew my guitar and was forever suggesting that I sell it to him. Late as it was in the day, the store was still full of customers, mostly professional musicians shopping for supplies for holiday gigs. The owner was happy to see me and lamented the fact that I hadn't been in for a while. I laid the guitar case on the display case and said flatly, "I'm selling my Martin." He looked surprised and genuinely sad. Still, there was a glint of greed in his eyes. "Are you sure about this?" was his first response. I nodded in the affirmative. He sighed, started to open the case, and said, "Okay, I'll write it up and put it on consignment. What's your asking price?" "I don't want to put it on consignment," I told him. "I want to sell it to you right now for $350 in cash." He looked at me in complete disbelief. He flared his nostrils in a not so subtle attempt to sniff out alcohol or drugs on my breath. "I can't do this, Lon. Give this some thought." "I've given a lot of thought. It's Christmas Eve. I need $350 for our family's Christmas." He closed the case and said, "Sorry, man. I couldn't live with myself. It's your baby. I don't want you to do this." "Okay," I said. "If it makes you feel better, you can give me the money and throw in a replacement guitar from off the wall." He thought for a moment and said, "Okay." Then he walked over to the wall display of guitars and picked out a beautiful new Gibson J45. "Will this do?" "Sure," I said, "if it'll make you feel better." A Gibson J45 is a pretty fine instrument and represented an extremely generous trade. A few minutes later, I walked out of the store with $350 in cash and a new guitar. I headed straight to the antique store, purchased 2 items, a rocking chair Constance had admired, and my Magick sword. Constance and I spent the rest of the Magick cash in the toy store. In the spring, I even sold that Gibson to a friend and for the next 29 years, I didn't own or play a guitar. 29 years. I left the world of music, embarked on the study and practice of ceremonial magic and the associated arts. My sword, my store-bought inexpensive Masonic ceremonial blade, has gotten quite a workout in the last 40 years. I wouldn't dream of trading it in for a new one. It's my Excalibur, my Sting, my Nothung. I carry it in dreams and visions. With it I've done battle with dragons of my own nightmares, banished demons, and stormed the gates of heaven. My cheap Masonic sword is the material metaphor of my word. I needed it to find my voice, the voice of my own great work, for which my old Martin guitar was merely a pre-echo. With my sword, I banish the demons of indolence and laziness, invoke the gods of discipline and focus, and pierce the mysteries of my own soul until I cut through and found my magical voice, the word of my own great work. Every word I write, every sentence, every poem, every book that pours onto the page is my word. My sword is my tongue, my keyboard, my computer, my printer, my telephone, my network of brothers and sisters, friends and colleagues. What is your word? The answer to that question will hand you your magic sword. It's like you'll try out many lesser swords before you find the true one. But once again, you have to start somewhere. And there's no time like the present. But before I give you a bit of sword shopping advice, I'd like to share the latest episode in my Magick sword adventure. Remember, this was written 15 years ago, I think. It seems that my Magick sword has come full cycle. My original Magick sword has come back to me, as surely as if it had been returned newly forged from the hand of the Lady of the Lake. No, my old Martin D28 didn't reappear miraculously on my doorstep, but something almost amazing happened. Although, if you run across that Martin D28 with the wing solar disc in the headstock and the 93 on the 12th fret in Roman numerals, you can go ahead and buy it to me and send it back. I wouldn't turn it down. But I digress. A couple years ago, after a break of 35 years, I started writing songs again. It seemed like a natural evolution of my writing and magical career. I'd been lucky to secure a song publisher and a record label, and I really enjoyed playing a few songs at my talks and workshops. Shortly before my 65th birthday, that was 9 years ago, I entered one of my newly recorded songs in a national songwriting competition. I shamelessly appealed to my family, friends, colleagues, and social network contacts to listen to it, and if they absolutely didn't hate it, vote for me. When the contest ended and the votes were counted, I won first place. And what was the prize? A beautiful, new, and rather expensive, it was a high-end Alvarez Masterworks guitar. Anyway, that's where I'm going to stop. I go on to give hints of how you may want to go about shopping for a sword if you're not ready to build one yourself from scratch. And that's that. Well, I hope I stayed on in this new parking lot with uncertain Wi-Fi connection. And I hope to see you tomorrow. Anyway, continue to be good to yourself, be good to each other. And if you want to hear my Magick sword in action, listen to one of my songs on any number of YouTube or anything. Okay, talk to you later. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law. Love under will.